Spring training is upon us. I am down in Maryville right now covering Brewers camp for the first week or so of full squad workouts. So we have a little bit of news, a little bit of analysis, some early storylines to watch coming up on this week's edition of the Brewer Fanatic Podcast. Jack Stern joined by Spencer Michaelis, who is still back home in Milwaukee. Spencer, I always make the joke to people that whenever I travel to a warm state, it's the same temperature in that state as it is in Wisconsin. It's been about 60 degrees every day that I've been here. I know when I flew out, it was 55 at home and 60 in Phoenix. What's the weather looking like back in Wisconsin right now?
It is. It's not trending well, Jack. It's trending down in temperature. We are potentially going to get some snow overnight, and almost certainly tomorrow. So, yeah, I think you're doing all right at this point in terms of the difference that you're getting out of this, because it was the beginning part of this week, even including most of the day today on Thursday, was kind of hovering around that 50, which is awesome. Love that. We got to have practice outside a bunch this week for the coaching job, which is wonderful, which means it's not late at night. That's also great. But yeah, no, I think you're still coming out on top in this one.
Okay. Well, we've got quite a bit of news to get to here on this week's show, because in the time between the Caleb Durbin emergency pod and the start of camp, there was a little bit of action. So we're not necessarily going to go in chronological order here. We're going to go more area or rank of importance. But the Brewers did do something at third base. We talked about how we didn't really think after the Durbin trade there was going to be a big move. But they did end up going with the kind of underwhelming veteran route, just to have another body in the mix, somebody who's got a little bit more of a track record, Luis Rengifo. And before we get to him, we should also note that the Brewers also brought back Gary Sanchez. He is going to once again back up William Contreras, most likely to start the year. So we had talked about how when the Brewers signed Reese McGuire, that maybe that meant that Jefferson Cairo was going to start the year in the minor leagues. I think this one almost certainly means that Jefferson Cairo is going to start the year in the minor leagues. I was on the Brewer Fanatic live stream talking about this just a few minutes before we started recording this. And I said, really more than anything, this is a Jefferson Cairo related signing, not a William Contreras related signing. I don't think it means William Contreras is going to catch any less, if the past 2 years have been any indication. But what this does, I think, is it gives the Brewers the ability to option Cairo to AAA for sure, get a little more time to just catch regularly, and get a little more time to work on the swing decisions and try to cut down on the chase a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's the main thing here. It's more than anything, I think it's getting him everyday playing time behind the dish again for the first time in now multiple seasons. He really hasn't had this going for him. He hasn't been able to catch like a full week's worth of games since 2023 at this point. So it's been a while. I think getting him used to that schedule. Obviously, if he does get up to the big leagues, barring injury to Contreras, he's not going to be on that schedule. But you do need him to be able to be on that schedule if Contreras does end up getting hurt. So, yeah, I think this is a totally reasonable, fine move. And like you said, I don't think this changes a single thing about Contreras, especially now that he's got the finger healed up from his surgery and everything else. Like, it seems even less likely he'll be seeing time off, even though that really didn't factor in much to the decision making on that in the last year plus, since it became an issue anyway. But yeah, I think this is Cairo gets to go to AAA. They get to see how the arm plays, how it bounces back game to game as he plays regularly. And then also swing decisions on the offensive side. I think they want to see a little bit more of an extended look at him against higher level pitching, see how he responds to some of the, different approaches pitchers are going to take to him. I do think, like we've talked about before, in the end, the most important thing is going to be how he develops at the big league level against those types of things. I think that's where we're going to learn the most. I think that's where he's going to grow the most. But I do think there's still time and room for him to do this in AAA and get better at it and get a little bit more used to it, because they are going to have a better plan of attack against him than he saw at the lower levels of the minors.
Moving on to Luis Rengifo, which is probably going to be the slightly more impactful signing, at least out of the gates here, I would guess. So Luis Rengifo, he spent all of his career to this point in the big leagues with the Angels. He's bounced around between a couple of different infield spots. Second base is probably the most natural position for him. He has played some third, though, some short, some outfield. Two things to note here. Number one, has been a good above average hitter in the past, as recently as 2 years ago. He had a nice little 2-year stretch, 2023 and 2024, where he was, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it was an OPS plus kind of in that 110 range, 115 range for 2 years in a row. Struggled in 2025. I believe a WRC plus of 79, if I'm remembering correctly off the top of my head. Spencer, you can correct me if I'm wrong. But the bigger thing here on the offensive side is, number one, Matt Arnold said earlier this week when he and Mark Atanasio and Rick Schlesinger all met with the media at the beginning of the week, he said that they feel there's a little more potential in there than what we saw last season. But also, I think that even if you just look at the profiles of Rengifo and Caleb Durbin, they're not exactly the same. Durbin made more contact. Durbin was better at air pull to kind of leverage his batted balls. But it is a little bit similar in the sense of, like, not going to hit the ball very hard. Got to be a little bit more focused on trying to hit it on the line. Going to be a little bit more of an on-base type guy, not a huge slugger. So I do think there is a world in which Luis Rengifo and Caleb Durbin are fairly similar value-wise or very similar offensively in 2026. And Matt Arnold said, look, you can't perfectly replace Caleb Durbin with one player, but I would venture to guess that that's kind of what the Brewers think they're doing here. I would not be surprised if they think that their models believe that Luis Rengifo and Caleb Durbin are going to be very similar players in 2026. And then after 2026, you're going to be handing it over to one of your higher ceiling prospects who you think is going to be able to hold down that third base position for the foreseeable future. And, we'll get into a little more of the nitty gritty on Rengifo's profile and what the Brewers seem to think they can get out of it. But I think right now that's just the initial read of kind of the way that they're thinking of this and how the third base mix looks right now.
Yeah. I think that's, like you said, Matt Arnold's not going to outright say that, especially just the way he handles things publicly is going to be complimentary of Durbin, and Durbin obviously deserving of a lot of that. But I would imagine, like you said, this is more or less how they're viewing it. They're looking at it as somebody who could, in their eyes, pretty easily end up matching around what Durbin was going to give you on the offensive side of the ball. Like you said, we'll get into the defense and maybe some of the splits and stuff in a second. But just to circle back to some of the WRC plus stuff you talked about, it was 73 last year, 118 the year before, 115 the year before that, and 102 the year before that. So really 3 straight years of being league average or better. And in 2022 and 2023, he had 17 and 16 homers respectively. So like showed a little bit of pop, showed enough pop to poke out double digits, even probably closer. He was on track in 2023 for about 20, but he only was able to play in he only had 445 plate appearances that season. So I don't know that he's necessarily somebody I would expect to get up to those numbers. I wouldn't really, but I do think he's someone with similar, maybe a little bit more power, even if it's done a little differently than Durbin in terms of the air pull, like you talked about. The other part of this is that he was off to a very, very strong start in 2024, having a very good first half, injured his wrist, ended up missing basically the second half of the season, and then it led into a pretty disappointing 2025. I don't know exactly what ended up getting hurt in the wrist. I don't know if it was like a hamate bone or if it was something along the lines of just a normal broken wrist, or I can't remember exactly what it was, but wrist injuries do tend to have some nagging consequences, some things that can hang around. I do wonder if the Brewers believe that part of it is that he just didn't quite bounce back from the injury in a great way, and maybe there's a little bit more in the bat just simply by getting healthier again. But he did play most of the season. I mean, he was out there pretty much every game for the Angels last year. So I'm just speculating a little bit on that, but it could make some sense to me, or it would make some sense to me if that is the case, at least partially. So yeah, I think you're right. I think they're kind of looking at it as this is somebody who could step in, play the Durbin role, especially, we'll get into it, but especially against lefties like Durbin did, is where you're probably going to see the best version of Rengifo, kind of like you did with Durbin. And then maybe they figure out something else if things aren't working out great against righties. But I think it's a pretty reasonable shot to take on somebody who could give you pretty close to the same production at $3.5 million. And then the overall math on the deal is that you pick up two interesting lefty pitchers that you like. You pick up a David Hamilton who can fill a utility role, and then you feel that you're, for this season, potentially going to get similar value out of a guy that you signed for a very reasonable deal shortly before spring training. And that's pretty much the overall math, I think, in this equation for the Brewers, which makes a lot of sense. And if it does work out with Rengifo, it will probably look pretty good for them. I think if it doesn't work out, it could be interesting, and we'd have to see who else can maybe fill that gap. But you can definitely see the thought process here, and I definitely get what they're going for.
So when Matt Arnold talked about Rengifo's bat, he really focused on what they think he can do as a right-handed hitter. And if you look at the splits for 2026, Luis Rengifo, so he's a switch hitter, as a lefty had a 267 weighted on base average, as a righty 266. So that looks like it's the same. But if you dig a little bit deeper here, he has significantly more pop from the right side, and I think that's what the Brewers are getting at. So Rengifo, as a lefty, a 288 expected weighted on base, average exit velo of 86 miles an hour, 29% hard hit rate, and his bat speed was 69 miles an hour on average. As a righty, a 329 expected weighted on base. So that's above average, a little bit above average as a righty. Expected results based on how he's hitting the ball, how much contact he's making. 91 mile per hour average exit velocity. So significantly higher than as a lefty, 86 to 91. And then the hard hit, 29 as a lefty, 45 as a righty. And then the bat speed, 69 as a lefty, 72 as a righty. So swinging significantly harder, hitting the ball significantly harder. That is a bat that those ingredients profile into a pretty good right-handed bat against lefties. Where this gets interesting now is what do they do against lefties? And this is where just kind of, Spencer, we had talked about this a little bit privately about how we were wondering, like, what do the Brewers think of a guy like David Hamilton, someone who has not hit a whole lot at the big league level. He was okay a couple of years ago, but strikeouts higher than you'd like, walks lower than you'd like. But he does have the speed and the defense and the versatility, and those are things that the Brewers love that stuff. And I think that they believe it gives guys a very, very high floor. And David Hamilton checks those boxes. So we had both said, we don't want David Hamilton really in a regular role at any position. We feel like he's a good replacement for Monasterio, maybe someone who can be even better in that utility role than Andrew Monasterio. But I am starting to wonder if, like, between the splits and what Arnold said about emphasizing the righty bat, and he talked about David Hamilton a lot too. Atanasio brought up David Hamilton a lot in that conversation about what we got back and how we feel we're doing and like the kind of moves we're making. That I'm kind of preparing myself to see quite a bit of David Hamilton, and I don't know if that means a platoon at third base or if it's more of a Rengifo plays against every left-handed pitcher as a righty and like 60 to 70% of the right-handed pitchers, and then Hamilton takes the rest of the time against righties. I don't know what the breakdown is going to be, but I'm just starting to wonder if, Rengifo is going to get a lot of time there, but I'm not entirely sure off the bat that this is going to be fully his position to lose.
Yeah, and I think there's some logic and some interesting things to look at when it comes to Hamilton being somebody that they like. I think we talked about the defense. Um, it sounds like the defense league wide is viewed as some of the best in baseball, just generally. Like it is really, really highly thought of. Um, Defense, and I would imagine the Brewers also view him in that lens and as somebody who's just a really, really good defender. Obviously, that carries a lot of value in this organization, and like you talked about, and then the speed on top of that adds to the value that he's already bringing outside of the bat. Um, if you look back at like his 2024 season, and we're getting, I want to be clear before I get into any of this. This is all pretty small sample, but it's not tiny samples either that I'm going to be talking about here. So in 2024, he had a 103 WRC plus against righties, and that was in 267 plate appearances. So had a solid season. Actually had some decent slug, had an ISO of 159. I mean, probably some batted ball luck in here. I don't have the StatCast stuff in front of me. I just was trying to look quickly. But that's a league average hitter with the speed and the defense. You would take that happily if you're getting that against righties. The other part of it is that home versus road. And I mentioned this originally when we talked about him a little bit, but I was actually talking about it, I think I was talking about Siegler in the moment when I said it. Maybe it was about Hamilton too. But Fenway, for guys that are kind of like those two, where they don't have huge power, but they do hit a decent amount of fly balls to the pull side. For lefty bats, it's not really ideal because straightaway right is actually quite deep at Fenway. Obviously, the pesky pull, everyone kind of thinks about that, but it juts out really quickly. It's actually pretty deep to straightaway right. And in his time as a Red Sox player, Hamilton had a 550 OPS at home, and it was 750 on the road. And again, I'm not saying this is the biggest sample, but it is over 250 plate appearances again. So, like, it's not a tiny sample either. Um, there are some things to like in terms of the production that he gave when he was in a better situation for what his profile is actually capable of doing. He plays great defense. He's very fast. I can see a world where, like you're talking about, I don't really expect it to be a full blown platoon, but kind of a soft platoon. Maybe more like what we saw with Siegler during stretches when he got like that couple week stretch where he basically faced every righty and they were trying to really give him his opportunity. But the rest of the time, he was kind of getting like every two or three righties you'd see him out there.
He was getting a lot of the low slot righties, is what it was.
Well, that too, but I'm just generally now like just in terms of the how often he was facing righties, just kind of looking at it that way. Like I could see it kind of shaking out that way where Hamilton's not necessarily even, it might even be a little bit more than like the 40%, 60% going to Rengifo, but I don't really expect it to be all that close to 100 and 100. Maybe it's 60% for Hamilton instead. Against righties, and he gets those opportunities. And if he's running with it, then I'm sure they would let him go, and then it might become more of a full blown platoon because there are a lot of things that point to that being best for Rengifo to get the best out of him too. But I think there are ingredients there that make him more interesting than we probably acknowledged at first, other than the defense. But there's still a lot you got to bank on here. There's not a ton of walks. There's still a lot of swing and miss. They're pretty high strikeout numbers. Like, it's not the same profile we've seen work for the Brewers necessarily, but there are ingredients that they've gotten pretty good results from types of players like David Hamilton before. So if they can maybe minimize some of the swing and miss, then yeah, I can see it working out pretty decently. And then when we look at it, you're talking about like the soft platoon or however it ends up shaking out. I could see those two giving you pretty similar to what you would have been hoping for from Durbin, especially if you are maximizing Rengifo. I could even see it looking a little bit better when you kind of combine their tallies and factor in all the defense that Hamilton would probably be giving you while he's out there.
So if we're talking about Rengifo versus Durbin, as we were talking about earlier, I think you can do that with the defense too. And the defense is going to be the most interesting story for me because, like we said at the beginning of the show, Rengifo, not a good defender. And I've even seen some people saying, well, he graded out well at second base last year. Yeah, but he grades out poorly at second base for his whole career. He's not a good defensive infielder is really what it is.
Yeah.
And he has been the worst at third base metrically out of any position. But Caleb Durbin was in that same boat at this time last year. I was down here at the end of camp last year when Caleb Durbin was still getting reps at third base. And he looked like he had never played the position before. I mean, he had no idea, or at least seemed to have no idea of how to handle any ball off the bat from the left side. And within probably a month and a half, 2 months of his big league career, all of a sudden Caleb Durbin is playing very good defense at third base. It was absolutely remarkable turnaround. Like, I think we were both shocked to see how quickly that transformation happened and how dramatic it was because, you know, I'm sure people who maybe weren't at spring training, you hear the reports on it and stuff, but like to have seen Caleb Durbin play in person third base in March of last year and then to see him in person play third base in June, it looked like two completely different players. And a lot of the difference was Matt Erickson. Matt Erickson really coached him up on not only the fundamentals of the position, but also understanding what he needed to do with his body to play that position. Like, there were certain things that Matt Erickson had Caleb Durbin do that were specific to him, how he had him play certain balls to compensate for the fact that he didn't have a great throwing arm, like different things like that. And, you know, I think for as much credit as a lot of the pitching guys get and the Brewers get for their pitching development tricks, Matt Erickson is probably as impactful on the infield with the way that he's been able to turn guys into good defensive infielders. And to me, that one's almost more interesting because I feel like the pitching stuff has become so developed across baseball. Like, this is kind of becoming my new fixation a little bit if you want to talk about Brewers player development labs. But Matt Erickson was big for Caleb Durbin. He was big for Joey Ortiz last year too, helping Joey Ortiz. I know outs above average, loved him the entire year, but helping metrics like defensive runs saved or baseball prospectus, deserved runs prevented, helping Joey Ortiz get better at the kind of things that those metrics were dinging him for. And he got Joey Ortiz up from, you know, playing defense in a way that those two metrics thought was really bad to playing defense in a way that those metrics thought was really good. So it all came out even by the end of the year. But with this in mind, I asked Matt Arnold, like, the defense publicly has not looked good for him. You guys love defense. You guys have turned guys into good infielders before. Do you think that there's the athletic ingredients for him to become a good defender or at least a better defender with some development there if you guys can coach him up a little bit? And Matt Arnold immediately praised Matt Erickson and made it clear, like, Matt Erickson is a very, very big part of this signing. So I'm going to read off the quote that he gave in response to that question. He said, the first thing Rengifo did when he came into workout yesterday at 2:00 was take ground balls with Matt Erickson. And just knowing that Matt Erickson is here and what he's been able to do with our infielders was somebody we talked a lot about before we acquired Rengifo. Having those tools and ingredients and having Matt as part of that evaluation process saying, hey, I've seen this guy. I think he has a chance to be really good here. We believe in Matt Erickson making these guys better. So pretty high words of praise from the Brewers president of baseball operations. But I think it does kind of shine a spotlight on, like, Matt Erickson does some pretty impressive things with these infielders. If you ever get a chance to talk to him about infield defense, I always think it's a pretty fun conversation to kind of hear the way that he breaks stuff down and the way that he kind of approaches the fundamentals of playing on the infield. And Spencer, I know that, you know, when you played college ball, you were an infielder too, so some of that stuff kind of fascinates you a little bit as well. But after seeing what he did with Caleb Durbin last year specifically, I'm very, very curious to see what the plan is for Luis Rengifo and what he's able to do there because, you know, like I said, the Brewers making it very clear that Matt Erickson has already done his homework, already did his homework before the Brewers signed Rengifo when they were thinking about it. And everybody in the room seems to think that he can help him make some pretty big leaps in the field.
Yeah, this is This is really fun. Obviously I enjoy the pitching talk, but like you said, I feel like it's become not standardized, but a lot of it is it's pretty similar. Like a lot of the talk is going to be similar. You can kind of look at something and say, this makes some sense. You could maybe go this direction. But infield is a lot less, especially publicly, like easy to break down certain things and look at how they might try and fix something or develop something. Like last year with Ortiz, like you couldn't see that he was landing a split second late in his prep steps. And that was kind of causing these bad jumps on the infield. Obviously, a team would have that type of data, but we don't really get to see that, and you couldn't really see it with the naked eye. So, like, I do really enjoy this stuff. So I love when you talk about this stuff with Erickson and with anybody, because this is, for me, like I probably nerded out about infield stuff more than even pitching when I played. It just fascinated me as a player. I wanted every advantage I could get on the infield. I felt like I kind of just thought through as many things as I could, and hopefully it wasn't messing me up to have that many thoughts going on in my head. I don't think it was, but that part is really, really fun for me, and it's played out with Erickson on the big league coaching staff that like infielders have made big strides, like a bunch of them. And even like at first base, we didn't get to see it for most of the season, but like Rhys Hoskins had made some pretty solid jumps defensively in his time there. And Vaughn showed some pretty decent things that he hadn't necessarily shown in Chicago at first base. And then obviously Terang's had great seasons. He was always a very good defender, but you talked about Ortiz. And then Durbin, like you mentioned, spring training, even in the games we could see, the few games that we saw with him at third, like you could see it was not comfortable. And then I watched a lot of him in Nashville before he got called up. And I said at the time, like, I think he's gotten better, but I don't think he's a good defender right now. And then I remember I was at his debut, actually sitting in like the perfect seats for it. I was sitting in like really nice seats, kind of in line with the third base line, basically right behind the plate. And there were like 3 balls hit that no joke, his first step was the wrong direction. And this was
I saw that too. I saw that from the press box.
Yeah. And this was his big league debut. And then, like you said, by June, he was grading out by every metric as an above average defender. And like, obviously a lot of that goes to Durbin and the work that he put in, and obviously taking well to coaching and stuff. This is not just Matt Erickson can't just wave a magic wand and now Caleb Durbin's a good defender, but like, that's impressive. And that is a huge jump in a very small amount of time at a position that he was not comfortable at, clearly, just a couple months prior. So like, you kind of said this to me at one point too, and it made some sense. I think the Brewers might view third as the spot of the actual non-first base infield spots, as like, if you're a good enough athlete and you have decent enough hands, we can figure out third base with you. Like, we can kind of make this a spot where we think we can teach guys third base and do it at a pretty high level. And I would imagine that is what they're seeing here with a guy like Matt Erickson to work with him with their track record. Like, I think they believe that as long as you have some of the tools that are needed, and that's kind of what he's talking about, having the ingredients, I think they believe that they can make him. I would guess they don't even think they could just make him an average defender. I bet they would think we could probably get him to be a little bit better than average and genuinely like bring a little bit of value on defense. And we'll see how that plays out. But I would bet that's what they're looking at and believing right now when they look at a guy like Rengifo. And you're right, like at no point prior to last season did he grade out well anywhere. He did have the solid season by pretty much every metric at second base last year. So maybe they saw some new things in the way he was doing certain things. He was with Ron Washington last year, who, for everything else about Ron Washington, he is known as a very, very good helper of infield defense as well. Like, that's kind of his main thing. So maybe they saw improvement in the hands. Now they're saying we can fix some of the footwork, or we can fix some of the other stuff, the timing, the steps, the jumps that he's getting off of the bat. I would imagine all of that is kind of going into this, and then everything to go along with, a bounce back potential in the bat and everything else. I'm guessing they feel like there's some very legitimate value that can be pulled from the defense. And if they can, that raises the floor quite a bit for him this year, even if the bat necessarily is, if it is a platoon bat. even if it's not quite to the level it's been against lefties before. If they can pull defensive value out of him, there's probably some decent value there no matter what. So it'll be really interesting to watch. It could be something that doesn't show up for a month or so into the regular season, kind of like we saw with Durbin, where there were some growing pains. Obviously, Rengifo has a lot more experience, including at the big league level and at third base in general. So you'd hope it's maybe a little bit quicker learning curve. But yeah, this is going to be one of my favorite, just like most people probably won't be paying too much attention to it, stories to begin the year, just to see how it is kind of tracking. And defensive metrics can jump one way or the other a lot early on. So you can't just look at them and say small sample size, oh, it looks good, or oh, it looks terrible. But even just watching him, just seeing how he looks and how comfortable he looks. I mean, you could see it with Durbin last year. There's the metrics and everything else backed it up, but you could see a change in comfortability. So I'm hoping we can kind of see that growth from him. And if they do, I think it's going to help quite a bit in terms of the value he's going to bring.
Well, I can make you the promise right now. I'm going to try to, in the last 3 days I'm down here, find out what Matt Harrison thinks of Luis Rengifo and what ingredients are there. Coaches are pretty hard to get in spring training, so we'll see if I can actually pull that off. But yeah, I think we're both in agreement as weird baseball nerds. That's up there for one of our seemingly insignificant baseball nerd stories to watch. So we'll
Yes.
see what the next few weeks look like for him. But we do got to get to a little bit of other news from spring training. This one actually breaking a couple hours before we recorded this episode. Pat Murphy will not be a lame duck this year. He did agree to a new 3-year contract, first reported by Ken Rosenthal. Adam McCalvey confirmed it a few minutes later. And the important distinction here, this is not a contract extension. This is a new contract. So it is a new 3-year contract, but it starts now. It replaces this season, 2026, which was going to be the 3rd year of that original 3-year contract he signed. And it adds 2 years on top of now how long he would have been here. And then there's a club option for 2029. So it could be as many as 4 more years that Pat Murphy is managing the Milwaukee Brewers. But when we talked to Mark Adanazio a couple days ago, the question was raised, are there any news, or is there any news on that front? Again, deflected, didn't give an answer, said they're not going to talk about the contract situation. But behind the scenes, clearly they were hammering something out in that moment, and now Pat Murphy is going to be here for at least 3 more years, assuming there's not anything catastrophic that happens within the next 3 years on the field for the Brewers. But he's not going to be managing on a lame duck situation. He's locked up for a few more seasons. So I don't know if I'd call that major news, but it does at least kind of add a little bit more certainty to what the future of the managerial chair looks like.
Yeah, it brings some clarity to the situation. It's not really a shock by any means. And obviously, as this is my own opinion, but we've been probably harder on Murph in a lot of ways than most people. But this is absolutely a good thing for the Brewers to keep Pat Murphy in charge and have him moving forward. There are things I'm probably still going to nitpick in game, but like the overarching message that he has, the ability to handle the clubhouse, the results he's gotten these first couple of years. I mean, there's absolutely no denying that he is a very good major league manager, and the Brewers should want to keep him around. So this is good news in that regard. And like you said, in baseball, things can change very quickly. You never know what's going to happen. The Brewers are going to be entering a time of a ton of talent coming through, seemingly. If they're not performing in a couple of years, things can change dramatically in terms of who's managing a ball club in that type of time. But I'm not really anticipating that. I think in my eyes, it seems much more likely if anything changes, it'll be Murph's decision to do so prior to the end of this contract. So I don't really expect that either, but I think there's a pretty good chance he is the manager through, I would guess, 2029. And then he'll be 70 at that point. So then I think we start to get into different questions about, does he want to keep doing this? And there's a lot of things that go into it at that point that will be his decision, Brewers' decision. But for now, I think this is a positive for the Brewers. I think it'll probably be, it's better to just not have that lame duck status, like you said, and have a guy under contract, knowing he's comfortable. I know in Moneyball they make a really big deal out of that. I don't think it's as big a deal as they make it in the movie, but I do think it probably brings some comfortability for everybody just knowing that he's going to be around, and that's a good thing.
Next piece of news, not as new as the Pat Murphy news, but still something that we should cover nonetheless. William Contreras and the Brewers agreeing to a repeat of last year, avoiding an arbitration hearing by signing a one-year deal with a club option for 2027. So, as a reminder, Contreras filed at $9.9 million, the Brewers at $8.5. This new deal is going to basically meet in the middle for 26, and then there's that club option for 27, where, once again, if he is projected to earn more than that, the Brewers will pick it up. If he is projected to earn less than that, based on the season he just had, the Brewers are going to turn it down. So, very similar situation to last year. The one note here that we should go over, and this is actually something I'll admit I didn't know this, which is a pretty big deal for the cases we've talked about in the past. Steve Adams at MLB Trade Rumors, when this agreement was made, noted that because there is a club option on this deal, and the one that he signed last year too, it counts as a multi-year deal for arbitration purposes, which means that it is not used in future cases. Like, you can't bring it up as a comparable salary to negotiate for, to argue in favor of. So that does change the context quite a bit about how these deals actually work, because basically what it is, it kind of is the best of both worlds for both teams. Contreras gets a higher number than what the Brewers filed for. The Brewers know that this is not going to be able to be pointed to directly in future ARB cases, so it kind of makes everybody happy. And honestly, knowing that, it actually is a very, very smart way of doing business in arbitration, because it just avoids a lot of the headaches that tend to come with that system.
Yeah, that explains why they have done that quite a few times, really, over the last however many years. I mean, Devin Williams comes to the top of the mind too, for somebody that they added a club option onto the last year of, not onto the last year, but as the last year of his arbitration, and they turned it down in the end. But yeah, that makes sense. I did not know that either, but it's a loophole, but it's a pretty nice way, easy way to just work around that. And like you said, it kind of works out best for everybody, because Contreras gets more money than what the Brewers were attempting to file at and hopefully keep him at in terms of arbitration money. But the Brewers don't have, like, we've talked about it, but teams aren't like outwardly blaming other teams for going above the number, but they'd prefer you not. And being able to not use this as something that teams can point at pretty much does that in that way. So this makes a lot of sense. And yeah, I would bet we're going to see the Brewers, depending on how the next CBA shakes out, and if this is a loophole that gets covered up or anything like that. But if this does remain, I can imagine we will probably see this happen a little bit more often, because you can toss on, a buyout like they did last year and actually add on like another $100,000 to William Contreras. And in reality, it's still not setting any new records or new numbers. So I would bet this is something we're going to see happen a little bit more. I'm really just surprised we haven't seen it happen more. It seems like something that just makes a lot of sense for everyone involved, but the Brewers have done it a decent amount. So unsurprisingly, maybe I'm missing it and other teams are doing it more often too, and I'm just not seeing it. But it feels like the Brewers might be a little bit ahead of the curve on this, because they've done it more than I can remember seeing anywhere else.
It's going to be really interesting. That is, the way arbitration works is all defined in the CBA.
Yep.
The CBA expires after this year, so
Yep.
I do kind of have that thought in the back of my head of, if this is growing as a way for teams to give guys raises without setting an ARB precedent, you're kind of working around that anyway. Do things get modified in the next CBA? Do people start saying, no, if you sign this deal, this can be pointed to now in future cases? Because we talked about how, like, it works for both sides in a lot of these cases, but I wouldn't be surprised if some of the players are like, well, why can't we point to this?
Yep.
Or some agents are like, why can't we point to this? If this is the way it's going to work now, if more teams are going to do business this way, we want to be able to actually refer to these contracts if we do go to a hearing. So this is a nice way to do it for now, but with the CBA expiring and some very long and contentious labor negotiations that are likely going to be taking place over the winter, I'm wondering if this is going to be something that gets changed in the next CBA.
Yeah, I would definitely not be surprised if it is. Like I said, maybe because it hasn't been used a ton, it might get overlooked in the midst of all of this, but these are going to be very in-depth conversations. So I would imagine any of these are going to be pretty much any little thing that has happened is going to be brought to the table and at least put into the negotiations. It might be something that the players wind up settling on. It's not important enough for us to make this a major point for us or anything that we really push for. But you are right. Like I could absolutely see some players and the players union not being thrilled about it and saying, well, yeah, they can sign those deals, but if it's an option, I would guess they're going to say it has to be, their argument would be if it's a multi-year deal, it has to be guaranteed money for both years rather than an option, because that obviously changes things pretty dramatically if you do it that way. But yeah, it does feel like something they're probably pretty likely to bring up. I just wonder if they'll find it to be important enough to make a big enough deal out of it, but we'll find out, unfortunately, probably.
Well, 40 minutes into the show, we're finally going to get to some actual spring training observations, just some things that I've heard and some things that I've seen in the few days that I've been down here in Brewers camp. Since I've shown up, we have had the first full squad workout, the entire team. We have had live ABs the last couple of days, getting to watch some guys throw. Live ABs, I guess, is probably the one to start with here because this is where I've had a couple different takeaways. What's nice about this is, during the season, we don't really get to see guys throw bullpens. When they are throwing bullpens, they are doing that in the bullpen at AmFam Field, which you can't really see clearly from the field if we're in the dugout or on the field during pregame. But this is all way more open. You can just walk right up to the bullpens and you can watch guys get loose and you can see what's going on. And me, being a pitching nerd, I'm really just looking for what guys are signing in when they're warming up to see what kind of pitches they're throwing now and if anything has changed. You could ask them too, but sometimes it's easier to just watch what they're doing before you go marching right up to them. But Logan Henderson, we knew that he was working on a curveball. Adam already reported that over the offseason, but this was actually my first opportunity to see it. I could only see it from kind of an odd angle, lined up next to the bullpen, kind of adjacent to the mound, but it looks like it's got a little more of a slurvy shape. Logan Henderson says it's mostly had more of that slurvy shape because he's throwing it from his usual lower three-quarter slot. But really the big takeaway there is it is breaking, like clearly breaking to the glove side. I could see it in the couple I saw. He said he doesn't have like the movement metrics yet. He hasn't dove into it a whole lot, but he can tell as well. This finally gives him a pitch that very clearly breaks in the opposite direction of his fastball and of his changeup. And it doesn't need to be a good breaking ball because we've already seen how good those two pitches are on their own. Really, he just needs something that is very clearly going in the other direction by quite a bit. And he's already got the cutter. We've talked about how the cutter is probably okay right now. And between the cutter and the slider, stuff grades have usually liked the slider a little more because it's got some depth. But in terms of what actually fits his arsenal better and has a little more lateral separation, it always has been the cutter. And we always felt that with the way his hand works, like the cutter is probably the one that he's actually going to be able to get to make it move glove side just a little bit. But even a cutter, you're talking about like 1 to 3 inches of cut. This is finally going to give him something that even if he can have, 5 inches of glove side break or 6 inches of glove side break, that's not a lot, but that's still, I think, more than enough. And if you're a hitter and you're used to seeing, running fastball with way more ride than you're expecting on it and, changeup that's diving and tailing, I think if you see even a curveball that's only got a little bit of glove side, like 5 to 6, it's probably going to look like more glove side break just because of what you're used to seeing going the other way. So Henderson said he's really happy with the progress on it. Hasn't fully scrapped the slider yet, but right now he is throwing the curveball instead of the slider. So I would not be shocked if by the time they get to opening day, they're like, hey, this is just going to be your fourth pitch. But I think if he has this, and we'll see how it looks when we actually get to an outing where he has StatCast data, but to me, this changes the conversation quite a bit about where he fits in the rotation mix, because I've always been pretty staunch on, those two pitches are going to give him a lot of mileage, a lot of swing and miss, but it's probably going to have to be in the bullpen. If he has this now, I do think he looks a lot more like a legitimate starter, and I think he's got a pretty good chance of leapfrogging quite a few guys on that depth chart, including maybe someone like Brandon Sproat, who, we talked about before. I think we both previously felt that he was probably the guy who profiled best as that fifth starter.
Yeah, I think this is, we've been talking about it forever. I've been talking about it since he was in the low minors. Like, he had two pitches that were at that time, at least, flashing as plus pitches, and now they both play pretty much to that level, and they worked in the big leagues, and we saw it work in the big leagues, but we have both pretty consistently said, like, he's going to need something that has at least some glove side movement. And I think that's mainly for same hand platoon reasons. That's to get righties out more than anything else. The cutter can probably work okay against lefties. He even used it a little bit against the Guardians lineup when he faced them against some lefties to try and get in on their hands, and also maybe backdoor a couple of them and land them for strikes. But I don't think you'll see a ton of the curveball / slider, whatever. It's actually, the shape is probably not going to be true curveball, kind of like you said, but it'll function in a way that's different than the slider that he was throwing. And I think this is going to give him something that can very much keep righties honest. And the changeup can play against righties. It's a good enough pitch that it's not like that's kind of changing generally anyway. Like the righty, don't throw changeups to righties as a right-handed pitcher. Like, that's not really a thing as much anymore, but there are certain changeups that you probably don't want to use in same hand platoons super often. His isn't one of them, but having something going away from righties rather than pretty much everything kind of coming back to him, even the cutter mostly just being, it mostly kind of hangs straight, gets a little bit of that glove side. But like you said, if he can get 6 inches, that will go a really long way towards giving especially righties a completely different look. And yeah, you're right. We've already seen what he can do in a small sample against mostly not great offenses, we should note, but at the big league level, we have seen two pitches that can really, really play. We're going to see how the slider curveball looks when he gets into these spring games, because we haven't mentioned yet, but StatCast at every spring training site this year is a huge thing for me. I am so excited about that. So we're going to get to see it the first time he steps on the mound. We'll get to see the shape, and we'll get to kind of track it throughout the spring, see how it's looking. But if he is getting that, 5-6 inches of glove side movement, and everything else is holding true in terms of his shapes and where he's at, like, he probably moves back into kind of the leading candidate to start the year in that fifth spot, I think, because like we talked about with Sproat, I think there are going to be some adjustments they want to make. I think there could be some things that they want to see in AAA where it could make some sense for him to go there. I don't think Henderson's is likely to have any mechanical changes, as I think Sproat, coming from the Mets, having made some changes last year. Eric Longenhagen talked about it a little bit. Some of the changes on Effectively Wild, he talked about some of the changes Sproat made last year that he kind of wondered if the Brewers will revert back to what he was doing prior to last year. And he kind of expects them to, I guess, is his thing. He ranked Sproat higher than anyone else on his top 100. I think he was 37th on the list and 3rd on the Brewers list overall. So he views him very highly, but he did wonder if they'd be making some mechanical changes. And if that is the case, I think that would probably make the most sense to at least start in Nashville for him to work on those things in a bit of a lower stress environment, while that would give Henderson kind of a clear lane to take that fifth spot, at least out of the gate. And yeah, that'll be that'll be a really fun thing to watch once he does get on a mound in spring, because like I said, we'll have the data every time he's out there and we can kind of compare it and see how it's looking, and not immediately jump to conclusions off of the first outing, but to see how it's trending, or if it does look solid from the start and holds true the whole spring, then yeah, I think he, at that point, unless Sprout, is also just looking great, and all else being equal, I think I still view Sprout higher than Henderson, but I think there's a lot of reason to believe that he could end up being the one that ends in Nashville if this does play out how kind of it looks like it's potentially tracking to for Henderson.
As far as other notes from live ABs, a couple of guys getting back on the mound. Aaron Ashby threw, D.L. Hall, Jacob Mizorowski threw live at-bats, Trevor McGill threw live at-bats on Thursday. Most of the guys, I think everything kind of looking about how you'd expect. It's early too, so you can't really read too much into it. As far as roles go for Aaron Ashby and DL Hall, Pat Murphy didn't really say anything definitive, especially on Ashby, but did make it sound like probably a multi-inning but not quite starter deal in spring training. So kind of on the fence a little bit. But one final note from live ABs, this one's not nearly as important as Logan Henderson, but I got to watch Jacob Waguespack pitch for the first time, like in person. And Spencer, you talked about him a lot when the Brewers made that signing with the high slot and everything, and kind of made some of the Tobias Myers comps. Just you can look at the high arm angle on StatCast, and you can look at the graphic and be like, oh, that's an outlier. It's up there. But to actually watch from behind the plate as he was pitching today, because he's so high up, that ball stays behind his head like forever, as opposed to some other guys who, especially if you've got a little more of like the not over the top, but like more traditional 3/4, like that ball kind of pops out a little bit sooner. Mind you, I'm from back behind the backstop and I don't have the eye of a Major League Baseball player, but I could not see the ball until it was well in front of his body. So cutting down the reaction time a little bit, and I think it's just fun to watch guys like that, because I think you can see the deception a little more. We talk about deception like, oh, these numbers mean that it looks deceptive, but to actually be back there and see kind of what that deception looks like. I don't know how many innings he's actually going to pitch for them this year, but I think we've learned at this point that anytime the Brewers see an interesting ingredient in a guy, you can't really rule out the chance of him making an impact later in the year. And to actually kind of see Waguespack throw in and just see how much of an outlier that really is, it was interesting to watch.
Yeah, and you're combining that with about 7 feet of extension too, so that's already adding a little bit of perceived velocity. So if you're struggling to see it out of his hand and he's getting down the mound a bit further than average, like that's cutting some time off of a hitter's reaction time. So it's interesting enough stuff. It's a funky delivery. It's something that hitters aren't really used to. And it's an organization that does well with ingredients like that. Like, yeah, I have no idea if we'll even see him in the big leagues. I kind of think we will at some point. I don't know how long or what the role will be, but it wouldn't shock me if Jacob Waguespack has a role in the Brewers bullpen at some point this year, where he kind of hangs around, because there are just a lot of ingredients that the Brewers do well with. It's just something that, especially just given volatility and relievers and injuries and stuff, like he gets his chance and he performs, he might get a chance to just hang around and keep doing what he's doing. And I think the Brewers will probably do a pretty good job of maximizing what he is capable of.
Well, I know we talked about it a little bit, like after the signing, you kind of went through it. You had the graphic up and everything. This four-seam fastball had almost a 40% whiff rate in AAA last year, and that was without crazy velo, even from that high slot. Like, it's high vert, but from that slot, it's not as high a vert as you might think. But so you're looking at this, you're going 30, almost 40% whiff rate. Like, how are guys swinging and missing that much, even if there is some deception there? This is where it's nice to, the eye test does still matter in baseball a little bit, and to be back there and actually see like, oh, I can barely see the baseball as it's coming out of his hand. Now I can kind of start to understand, like, okay, maybe that's where all the whiffs are coming from, even if, metrically the actual traits of the fastball aren't that great. Like, just the slot and the extension, to see how significant that is for him, it just kind of fills in some gaps a little bit and kind of gives you an idea of like, okay, this is what the Brewers like here, even though he's never had great results in the big leagues or anything like that. But you can see the vision a little bit. You can see the vision.
Yeah, absolutely.
Moving on to a couple of other notes from spring training so far. I asked Pat Murphy about what things are going to look like on the coaching staff this year. Ricky Weeks, no longer on the staff. He moved into a different role in the organization. The Brewers did not backfill that associate manager role. They said they were going to split up the duties a little more. So just some more details on what that's going to look like. Jason Lane is going to be handling a lot of the offensive strategy stuff, things along those lines. Jim Henderson is going to be a lot of pitching strategy stuff with the moves that the Brewers make. Chris Hook's still doing his thing. He works a lot more with the starters. Henderson is a little more bullpen and some strategy stuff. Evan Martin, who I'm guessing that's not a name a lot of people know. He's a younger guy. He's been in the dugout for a couple of years. He's going to be doing a lot of like strategy and information kind of stuff in his role. Hitting coaches, still have a 3-man deal on the hitting coach staff. Different names from last year, but still 3 guys. One of the things I'm really curious to see is what role Daniel Vogelbach plays. I asked Pat Murphy, he was a big, very passive hitter, big swing decision guy when he was a player. Do you think that that's kind of the role that he's going to fill on the staff this year? Is that why he's around? Murph said, I don't know that you can teach that directly, but he was a very, very prepared and very studious with his at-bats as a player. So it sounds like that is going to kind of be, what he tries to instill in some of these younger players, like, study up, really make sure you have an approach, know what you're doing when you go up there, because that's going to lead to better results. So be interesting to see what role that he plays. Matt Erickson obviously still going to do the infield defense stuff on top of being the third base coach. But I think really just when you look at the way that the Brewers are doing things now on the staff, I think it's a reflection of there's so many guys now on the staff that you don't necessarily need that traditional bench coach to kind of wear a lot of hats and be kind of the next man up in a bunch of different fields. I think you can let guys specialize a little bit more. And interestingly enough, the thing Pat Murphy really talked about was part of the reason they did not replace Ricky Weeks is because he didn't want to add any more guys to the staff. He actually felt that if they added more guys to the staff, it was going to start to get a little cluttered and you would start to have competing messages. They felt that the number of guys they have right now in that dugout is like the perfect balance of having enough guys to specialize in everything while not having so many guys that you have competing messages or guys talking over one another or confusing the players or different things like that. So interesting to see kind of the structure that things are taking on the coaching side. And really, for the most part, you can't exactly argue with the way that the Brewers have done this for the past several years, given the results, but it just seems like they're going further toward this is kind of what the number is now for modern baseball coaching staffs. And it's going to be interesting to kind of see how things go this year, especially because they did get rid of that associate manager / bench coach role, and they're just going all in on, hey, we're going to specialize, and this is the number that we think we need to make that specialization as effective as possible.
Yeah, that is interesting to hear him say that. I think when we talked about Weeks originally, I even wondered about that, if that was part of the equation here when they talked about not replacing him, if they thought that they'd kind of reached their limit on how many coaches could be on staff, because it does make sense. At some point, you have to start to worry, are they hearing too many different things from too many different people? And is there mixed messaging? Are things not really coming through right? Because this guy's viewing, even not like in a purposeful way, but one coach is just kind of viewing something that was relayed to him differently than how another person is. Like, it's kind of like telephone, the game. Like, at some point, the messaging just gets lost in translation if you have too many people touching it and talking to people about it. So, like, it does make sense, because even just generally, I wondered when that cutoff was going to hit, because coaching staffs have grown tremendously over the last few years. Like, the Giants kind of started that trend when Gabe Kapler got there, or they at least really accelerated it with how many people they had. It does feel like it makes some sense to eventually, now that we've gotten to this point, start thinking like, okay, we might have to kind of find our limit here and stop adding to the staff, because at some point, I mean, they're not even going to have room in the dugout at some point. Like, there are just too many people. So it does make sense. And yeah, as for the roles, I don't think there's anything too shocking or surprising there, but it does make a lot of sense the way it's kind of being laid out. And I think that's a good way to kind of take over, like you said, kind of a bench coach was always seen as like, always got to have his hand in kind of everything. But if you have this many people on staff, you don't really need that. Why not let the people who are really good at that specific thing handle each part of it during a game? Like that always makes, really always would have made a little bit more sense than having a guy who's involved in all of it and has knowledge of all of it. But like, other than the manager, I don't think you necessarily want other people to really have that type of role on the coaching staff. You'd probably rather guys specialize and be really good at what they're already good at. So a lot of it makes sense. I think it's probably a good way to go. And I would bet we'll see this happen a little bit more around MLB over the next couple of years, where teams do start to kind of lessen the staff from where they got to this point where some people have like 5 hitting coaches and all this stuff going on. Like, at some point, I think a lot of teams will probably realize this is a little bit of overkill. We don't need this many. And in fact, it might be hurting our players to some degree to have this many people and this many messages and this many voices. So yeah, it makes a lot of sense, and not really any surprises, but interesting for sure.
A couple of other things that Pat Murphy has talked about throughout the week. ABS was brought up this week. It's going to be the challenge system this year for balls and strikes. Murphy said, unsurprisingly, pitchers are not going to be allowed to initiate a challenge, which, I tweeted that out anyway, but that shouldn't be news. Pitchers should never be allowed to challenge calls. We work with pitchers. We've also watched pitchers. Pitchers can be very smart. Pitchers can also be very competitive and very emotional, and just they think that anything they throw within the batter's boxes is a perfectly painted fastball that should be called a strike. So it is the right call to never let them initiate a challenge. That's all going to be on the catcher. The more interesting one, though, was, at least for me, when I asked about, like, how's it going to work for hitters? Like, are there just going to be a couple of guys they give the ability to challenge? They're guys with best plate discipline, like maybe Christian Yelich or Jake Bowers, 2 guys who really know their strike zone well, or how are they going to kind of approach that stuff? And Murph said he doesn't want to really put guardrails on guys, especially this early in the year. So it sounds like everybody's going to have permission to use it and have the privilege to initiate that challenge when they see fit. Murphy said the bigger challenge is going to be, how do we instill it in guys to know when is the right time to do it, know the strategy of, okay, this situation, it's the 3rd inning of a random weekday game. There's nobody on base. It's like a 2-2 count. You get rung up on a pitch that's just off the black a little bit. Like, you probably don't need to use it there.
Yeah.
Yes, if you get it right, it doesn't hurt you, but like, that's not really what our focus needs to be in that moment. Like, know the situation where it makes more sense to risk burning your challenge. So it sounds like everybody's going to, at least out of the gates, get an opportunity to use it. But Murphy did say, if you're showing us that you don't know the strike zone very well, you're challenging calls and you're getting them all wrong, we are going to revoke that privilege from you. So, I can think off the top of my head of maybe a couple hitters who may have that revoked pretty quickly. But it does sound like for now they're just going to kind of use spring training to feel it out a little bit and kind of see, what's the best strategy for that, who should be allowed to use it, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Give them the opportunity to prove that they don't deserve that privilege. It's kind of like kids in school with a lot of things. You just kind of got to let them prove to you that they can't handle it. But most of them, I would imagine, are going to have a decent idea. I think, especially with the Brewers, for the most part, I think it's a pretty self-aware group. But there are going to be guys who just, I mean, we see it all the time when you're watching a game. A guy will get rung up on a pitch that definitely caught the plate, and they'll turn around and look at the ump and be incredulous that he called it a strike, and they can't believe that it was a strike. And in that moment, they're going to want to tap their head and call for a challenge. But like you said, you got to understand the situation. Now, if that's a 3-2 pitch with the bases loaded and 2 outs, and you genuinely think it's a 50-50 coin flip, then yeah, it's probably worthwhile to do that in most situations like that. Like that would make sense. But if it's an 0-2 pitch with nobody on and 2 outs, like no, there's really no time that you should really be challenging it unless it's the last out of the game. Like that's the only time that one should ever be challenged, because then you at least give yourself a new life. But it'll be interesting to see how that works. And I do think it's going to be, and I've seen it in AAA a little bit, but I think it's going to be really interesting to see the first time a big moment gets flipped. Because if it is a 3-2 count with the bases loaded, you can literally go from inning over, no runs in, to run in, bases still loaded, 2 outs on 1 ball strike call. And I don't think it'll happen a lot because those situations on 50-50 pitches don't happen a ton. But I can think back to Brewer games that the Brewers have won and lost because of a call that was very close, but called incorrectly. And yeah, it's just going to be interesting. I think the players will get used to it much faster than the fans will. I think fans are going to love it when it swings their way in a big moment, and fans are probably going to complain a lot more about the challenge system when it swings the other way. I think we see that with all challenge calls in reality already in baseball, but
Yeah.
it is going to be really interesting to follow. And like you talked about when it first came out that this was going to happen, like tracking who is actually good at this and who has the skill and who does well with challenging these calls. Like, I think that'll be a really interesting subsection of this whole thing. At the same time, it's going to take a while before any sort of sample size gets built up for players, because most of them aren't going to challenge that often. But there are going to be games too where there's just going to be an umpire who's having a really bad game. I've seen it in AAA when I've watched games where teams have challenged successfully like 12 times in a row to start a game because they just keep getting it wrong, and they keep challenging and getting it right, and you get to keep the challenges. So it'll be very interesting to see how this all plays out. I'm looking forward to it. I like the system. I actually saw, not to go on a tangent about it, but I saw on Twitter some people that are pretty smart baseball minds saying, well, like, why don't they just do the full balls and strikes? If they have the technology, if they're willing to do this for the challenges, they just should go to it all the time. And I think from a fan perspective, I think this is a lot better. I think it's better. I would like it more as a player too, just generally, I think. But I think from a fan perspective, the challenges are actually kind of exciting. Like when they show them on the screen, it brings a little bit of an element of suspense. And then also, there's a delay when they're waiting on these calls in the full ABS system. It actually, when AAA was using it, games were taking like a half hour longer on average, which is the opposite of what baseball has been trying to do for the last 10 years with all their changes. So I don't think they're going to want to go to a system that's immediately going to bring back delays in the game on every pitch because they got to wait for the call to come in. Maybe at some point they get better with the timing of it and they think it's a better deal, but I think people are going to like this when they see it in practice regularly. And I do think they might mess with how many challenges you get, how many you get to keep. Maybe there's a limit on how many even successful ones if they are having too many in a game sometimes or whatever. But I hope they stick with this. I do think it's going to be a good thing for baseball, and I prefer it greatly to the full ABS system.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty good compromise, and it makes the game more accurate, which I think is good for competition. But it also doesn't make the game feel robotic, or it doesn't ruin the pacing or anything like that.
Yeah.
Like, I think that also matters too.
Yep.
All right. We're going to pivot to the final observation from camp that I want to go over. And this is probably Spencer's favorite one. In fact, I'm stealing Spencer's thunder a little bit here. There is no official minor league sandbox this week, but for quite possibly the first time in podcast history, I am going to be the one bringing some minor league goodies to the show. So the first day that I was in camp on Tuesday, after the big league workout, the Brewers had several of their pitching prospects, several of their lower level pitching prospects, pitching in simulated games on the main field at American Family Fields of Phoenix. And they had the TrackMan running up on the big screen. So I parked myself down behind the plate and spent the entire afternoon watching sim games. In hindsight, I probably should have written more of this data down. I did take some pictures, though, and I'm going to kind of try to find my very loosely compiled observations, because really what I was wanting to see was, a lot of pitch shapes on a lot of these prospects who are either in low A ball or double A, somewhere where there is not full StatCast data regularly available to the public. So just a couple of notes that I want to run over really quick. Bryce Message was one of the first guys out of the chute, which was awesome because I had wanted some Bryce Message pitch data because he's always kind of been seen as a guy who very, very on the ball with like modern pitching and pitch design and that kind of strategy. So takeaway from that one is I don't think it's any different from what you had, Spencer, but the slider I think is by far the best pitch in that arsenal. Metrically, it bears out that way. So from what I remember seeing from some of the notes I have written down, again, I wasn't very thorough with a lot of this, and I was just kind of balancing between I can get some useful information, but also I just want to watch this because I think it's cool. The sliders that I remember seeing, though, kind of in that like -3, 0 to -3, and then kind of like 5 to 8 horizontal, which is a pretty nice, tight, gyro-y kind of shape. Curveball's a little bigger, like kind of in that -15 vert, 7 to 10 horizontal, kind of in that range. But slider, I think, is by far the best pitch. Fastball, he was like 93 to 95, anywhere from 15 to 18 vert. There were stretches where he was pretty consistently in that 18 range, then a couple where he was dropping down more into that 15, 16. But I think really the takeaway there is it's really not that great of a fastball. Like, I think if he's going to have success, it's got to be because, number one, the fastball velo needs to be there. He was like 93 to 95. 93 to 95 at around like 17 vert, where a lot of these were from his slot. It's just kind of an average-ish shape at average-ish velo for what baseball is these days. Eric Batanti and Andrew Fisher both kind of proved how hittable that is too, because there was a point in time where they both absolutely launched fastballs on back-to-back at-bats. Batanti hit one over the batter's eye. Fisher put one on the berm in right field, and this was back-to-back. The Batanti one was like middle in, little low maybe. The Fisher one, though, was like up and away, which is where you would think, okay, like the vert plays up a little if you throw it up. Well, Fisher got to that one too pretty well. So, and Fisher also being a guy who's like got a little bit more of that steeper bat path where you might think, okay, is he actually going to be able to get to that ball up and away, and is he going to be able to pull it in the air? And he did pull it in the air, a fastball with that shape. So I think that's going to be interesting to watch for his development. The results have been a little bit inconsistent for him in the minor leagues so far. It really is not like a great fastball. So I think, number one, the velo is going to have to be there. Number two, he's just going to have to find the best way to sequence his secondaries around it because, like I said, curveball's fine. Slider, I think, is like the one pitch I'm looking at where I'm like, yes, this is clearly a pretty good pitch. The kick changeup he's throwing is just not. I think it's more about getting some separation off everything else he's throwing. On its own, metrically, the movement is not great. It was mostly like single-digit vert and single-digit horizontal. A lot in kind of like that 5 vert, 8 horizontal range, or like some 3 vert, 6 horizontal, things like that. Just not a great changeup shape, but I think it's more about getting the separation. So interesting to see that from him. Spencer, before I move on, I don't know if you have any thoughts off of that. I should probably give you the opportunity to kind of bounce this off of your evaluations and what you had just seen going off of video.
Yeah, so first, definitely agree. Just from watching him, the slider's always been the best pitch in the repertoire. Curve probably, he does a lot of landing for strikes with it, which makes sense. It's a big pitch. Pretty big shape, like you said. The fastball played well for him in low A. Part of it being he did, especially early in the season, sit more in like the 95 plus range. There weren't a lot of 93s. He got sick mid-season, missed a couple weeks, and then he kind of sat like 93, 94 after that, and he did get hit a bit more after that, so that does add up. And yeah, the changeup he didn't use much in games, which isn't shocking, especially knowing that shape. I've seen like there's video of him at tread throwing much better shapes on the kick change. So maybe there's just something where he just needs to find the shape of it and find the feel for it a little bit more consistently. But yeah, the fastball right now, if that is the shape, and like you said, the slot is pretty stock, like it's pretty standard. It's at least to the eye, it doesn't look like there's anything really outlierish in either direction. It seems pretty normal. That's not a great shape. It's not a very special shape. I do think, I mean, he got up to, I know he hit 98.5 in game in low A as a 19-year-old. So like there is velo in the tank and he's a big dude. I think he could be somebody who gets it up more. I was going to ask you actually, do you know, I don't know why you would, but maybe you do. Do you know if they were using big league balls for this? Big league baseball?
I'm not sure.
Okay. Yeah, because it is a different baseball. I mean, it usually affects the shape by a couple inches from what I've heard. But yeah, either way, I mean, it'd be interesting to know. It doesn't matter that much, but yeah, otherwise, I mean, a lot of that tracks. I think it is something where the velo is going to have to be there. Hopefully he can find a little bit more with the kick change in terms of like, especially some run the other direction. I think depth wise, you can live with that 3 to 6, like you said, if it's getting more run. But the slider will be a good pitch for him. It could be a pitch that if the fastball plays well, if he can drop curveballs in, that's a relief role probably if the velo's there, especially. And then if you do get more consistent velo in the changeup, then you can start talking about, a potential starter at the big league level down the road. But I don't know if he's turned 20 yet, but either way, he is a teenager. So hopefully the velo is something that we'll see come around a little bit more as it's also first week of spring training. So that can always affect it a little bit too, I suppose. But yeah, I'm hoping that's not where it's at in season. That was kind of one of the things I was going to be looking for from him generally anyway. Like, is he going to be able to sit in those mid 90s? When he did, he pitched really well. When he didn't, that was when things would get a little haywire on him last year.
So and that is a good point. Like, you can't expect every guy's velo to be right where it would be mid-season. We're very early in camp. But kind of bouncing off that, like Ryan Bertrand was one of the next guys who went, and he was throwing harder than he was at least in the AFL. Like, I know you sent me some of his AFL data where he was sitting like 93 to 95 maybe. It was a lot more like 95 to 97 when I was watching him pitch. And it's like the Waguespack thing, like very over, like pushing the limits of how far over the top you can get. I think his angle is actually a little higher.
It is
like almost like so high to the point where actually like the ball is like it's popping out like over his head as he's coming down. But as you would guess from that slot, like he was probably averaging around like 22 vert. He touched 24 a couple times. There's one that I still have like marked down in my notes. 97 miles an hour, 24 vert at the top of the zone. Like, the biggest issue was it was all over the place. He was spraying the ball everywhere, which is not exactly anything new. But I think there's still a lot that needs to get figured out there. But that's just kind of an exciting one where you can see, okay, like there are some very clear outlier traits there. And if there is a velo bump coming on top of that, like, then it gets even more interesting if he actually is throwing. I can't find any other guy who's throwing 97 from like straight over the top, 24. Like that is just a look that I don't think anybody else is replicating.
No, they're not. And that's even without the velo last year. And he was in Appleton a lot of last year. He was sitting like 91 to 93, maybe a little bit higher, but he was starting. He was pitching longer outings, obviously. But he had in college been up to 98. So there was always velo in there. It was a little surprising to me to see some of the velo numbers when he first got into pro ball. I've talked about it on here before a few times, but like he looked out of shape at first in pro ball. I thought last year he looked like he was in a lot better shape and he held up a lot better as starts kind of moved along in terms of holding the velo. But if he can make a little bit of a jump to being more like mid 90s, I mean, he already had a 36% whiff rate overall last year. He was in the top 10 in minor league baseball for, I don't know what the exact innings qualification was, but for anyone who was pretty much a normal starter in minor league baseball, he was in the top 10. He was, I believe, 9th or 10th on that list. So like he got a ton of swing and miss, but he also walked a lot of batters. So him spraying the ball, not shocking. I was reading Longenhagen's, yeah, it was his write up on him a couple days ago. He did say in his write up that in terms of like the actual data, he was pretty around the zone last year. And watching him, that doesn't shock me. He was like, he needs to be in the zone more, but it wasn't spraying as much as you would probably guess based on the walk numbers. It sounds like it probably was when you were seeing him, and he had outings like that for sure. But the stuff is genuinely very fun. And if he does move to a pen role, which I would guess is where he's going to end up with this level of command, but if he does get there and he throws enough strikes, like that's a guy who can be there, especially if the velo is already ticked up in general. It could tick up even more if he is actually like set into a 1 to 2 inning role. He is a fun arm. And like you said, that over the top, he was 75 degrees in the AFL. And I think we said Wagasback was 72, if I remember right. So yeah, even higher than him. So it's a pretty insane, it's a weird looking delivery. It's got to be an uncomfortable, especially if you can become kind of that effectively wild type guy moving forward, where you are maybe not necessarily throwing a ton of strikes, but you're keeping batters honest and then having a weird delivery. Like that can play pretty well. We've seen that work in pen rolls from people before. So that is a fun one. And I don't think you told me the velo. Hearing he was 95 to 97, I do enjoy that part.
I'm looking back through it. I sent you the picture of the 97 and 24.
Oh, I think I got caught up. Yeah, you did. I got caught up in the 24.
Next one that like stood out to me just for like the very interesting combination of velo and shape. Wandy Torres, big lefty, like younger kid, but big lefty. He's wide guy. Like he's not like crazy tall or anything, but he's just, you see him walking around, like you tell he's like there's some mass there. So he came out and he was throwing 95, 96, touching 97 with a sinker that was like 3 to 6 vert, and almost every single one he threw had 20 plus inches of run, which is, again, he's lower slot too, so you would expect that a little bit, but still, like that's a pretty impressive shape there. I didn't really look too closely at the rest of the arsenal. It's like short curve, or short slider, sorry, and then what he was signing for as curve is basically like kind of a bigger sweepy breaking ball, which makes sense because of the slot. And some of these guys, I'm not sure if they're signing curve for curve or if they're signing curve for sweeper, if they also have a curve, just to avoid confusion. But basically a guy who's like going to have a lot of success, I think, playing the East-West game. And then if there is kind of that shorter slider in there, which was around like, I think it was sitting like 2 to 3 vert and like maybe 5 inches of glove side, like just kind of having that in there as a little bridge pitch. But that's a guy who I know Kurt Hoey had him on his potential prospect breakout list last year. But I know, Spencer, he's a little higher on your rankings than he is for a lot of people too. So that's one of the guys that I had not paid a whole lot of attention to, but to see him come out and throw the ball the way that he did, just the shapes that he's able to get to. And he's still a very young player too, doesn't have a whole lot of experience. He was an international signing a couple years ago, right?
Yeah, he missed most of the 24 season, I want to say. I think he just turned 21 last I checked, but it is his Rule 5 eligibility year because of all the time that he ended up missing. And because the international rules kind of expedite that process in terms of actual age that you are when you get there. But he is somebody who I may have sold Kurt on putting him on that list last year, talking about some video I had seen of him throwing 97 in the DSL, but he sat more like 92 to 94 in low A last year. You'd see a random 95 in there. You didn't really see the velo that I had seen on video a few times from when he was in the lower levels. But honestly, like I thought it was a solid sinker, but I didn't recognize that level of movement in it when I was watching it in low A. So, it's possible he added some, or it's, minor league cameras aren't always the best angle to see, especially east-west movement, but that is a really fun pitch, and that's something that's going to get quite a bit of. That's just a tough at bat, and it's a weird, funky type. Like it's a low slot, like you said. He doesn't get super far down the mound. I think he's got like pretty, like you said, he's a big dude in like a strength way for the most part. Like he's a strong
Mhm.
dude.
Yeah.
But I don't think he's the most mobile, so I don't think he's getting like super far down the mound. He seems like he kind of has he's tightly wound. It's probably the best way to say it. So I don't know that he's getting like on top of you, but I also think that adds to the deception a little bit in terms of the way he's throwing, the way he's moving, and then it's that's an interesting, like that much movement is really, really interesting, especially if he's touching 97. So given he is at that point in his career in terms of Rule 5 eligibility, it makes me wonder if they might see what it looks like in shorter stints and see if he can move a couple levels this year. But that's the type of stuff that eventually could play in a bullpen role, or as he gets to the point where they're like, okay, we view him as a potential big leaguer, then, maybe he's on the 40 man and they stretch him back out or something. But I do wonder if they're going to maybe try and see what he looks like just in shorter stints, if the velo's there, if he's somebody that could wind up actually playing in that role. And the other part of it is that, like, that's the prototypical type of guy that a team might take a chance on in the Rule 5 draft. Somebody who has that type of stuff, who could maybe play in a pen role for a year, and then you try and figure out where you go from there. And, a mid-90s lefty with a bunch of run, like that's the type of outlier pitch that a team could look at and say, "Ooh, that's worth us taking a shot on and seeing if we can make it work for a year, especially if we're not competitive." So he'll be an interesting to watch this year. I did not realize it had that much movement, though. That was a very fun thing for me to learn.
And changeup too, like similar movement, maybe 2 more inches of depth, but like 87. So like
Yeah.
94, 96 with that big sinker, and then down to 87 with the change. Like there is some real separation there. So it's not like he's one of those guys where sometimes you see guys who, they're hard sinker throwers and they're at like 94, 96 with the sinker, and then like they're at like 90 to 92 with the changeup or something. Like
Right.
it wasn't one, at least when I watched him, that wasn't one of those situations. He was actually like killing a good deal of velo on that changeup and like getting really good fade on it. So
Yeah, no, the changeup probably was, if I were to guess, I bet it got the best results against it of any secondary, or in his favor, the best results for him last year, because it was a pretty good pitch. I just rarely get velo on the changeup calls. They'll call out the fastballs, but they don't call that one out. So I was curious on that. And yeah, if he's dropping even 7 to 8 miles per hour with that type of movement, that's probably going to play pretty well.
last guy really quickly that I had any notes on, Mark Manfredi threw an inning. And I really wanted, when I saw him warming up, like I knew I wanted to stick around to watch him just because I like kind of the funky look there. And he's very like crossfire, low slot. He was getting up to 17 and 18 vert on a couple fastballs from a pretty low slot, which is, at that point, that's some pretty deceptive carry at the top. Towards the back half of his inning, though, he was like more consistently down to like 12 to 14. So it was a little kind of a big spread there. And, it's, I think in the era of like pitch movement and tracking all this stuff, I think people probably don't realize enough that like within a game, pitch to pitch, a lot of times there are fluctuations of like up to 5 inches or something a vert. That's why, like, when you look at a guy's chart, it's usually like a circle, kind of that cluster of the shapes. But in his case, it did feel like there was even more separation there with kind of where it was sitting. But seeing like where it looked when it was at its best, you can just definitely see kind of where that funky reliever profile is. And you can see why he got quite a bit of swing and miss last year in the minor leagues as well.
Yeah, it's not quite the same level in either direction for Burchard, but like it's a lot of whiff. There were too many walks, although he started the season really slowly in terms of walks. Like he was walking a lot of guys early, and it improved after that first month. Not to like a good degree, but it improved to a manageable degree if you're going to be a reliever with good swing and miss stuff. But yeah, I mean, he was up to 97 in AA last year. And if it is from that low slot and he's getting up to 17, 18 inches of vert, like that's a good pitch. And his delivery itself is It's kind of funny. The first time I ever saw him pitch in the system was for the T-Rats. And I immediately was like, oh, he's like combining Brent Suter and Josh Hader's delivery here. Because at that time, he had like a abbreviated windup like Suter did, where it was very fast through like the quick, step and then go and lift. But then like the actual leg lift is like turned and really gets into like the same type of position as Josh Hader used to, or still does, but as a Brewer. And it was kind of funny. He doesn't quite do the same Suter type stuff, but he does get that twist in like the turn that Hader has a little bit, which I imagine plays into some deception as well, along with that velo. So he is somebody that you should probably keep an eye on as like a reliever guy the next year or two. Just if there's going to be a random pop-up lefty that people haven't really heard of, he's already in Double-A, getting a lot of swing and miss and performing, showing pretty good pitch shapes and everything else along with it. He's an interesting one to watch, and he's from the 2023 draft. Shocker. But another guy from that draft that is just very, very interesting that they got for a pretty low signing bonus again as a college senior.
The one directly related spring question that we got came from Summer Fun and Passion. That's a good username. What's Jack's go-to spring training meal? So this is more so because I am lazy. There is a Raising Cane's directly across the street from the complex, and because I really don't feel like walking any farther for lunch most days, I will just go and eat fast food chicken.
Chicken tendies.
Chicken tendies. I got chicken tendies yesterday. I got the chicken sandwich today.
Nice.
It's fine as far as fast food goes. It's solid. We've had plenty of Cane's runs for like college baseball trips.
Oh yeah,
it's like as far as like chicken restaurants go, fast food chicken, I'd probably put it like it's probably in the top third, right?
Oh yeah, it's up there for sure.
Pretty solid. The bigger issue is that it's just not as good when you've had it 4 times in like 7 days.
Yes,
that's when it gets a little problematic. But like I said, I'm not really like a big on like exploring the cities that I travel to. I don't like cities in general. Like, I don't know. I think sometimes people have a hard time believing it because I'm into more of like the nerdy side of baseball, but like I'm actually a little bit more like I would rather just like go seclude myself in the country and go hunting or fishing or something like that. So I'm not really gonna, like you saw it when I went to Seattle with you this year. Like I really had no desire to go outside of the ballpark or outside of where we were staying. But yeah, so I'm mainly just going to go for convenience, and that's what's right across the street. So there you have it.
I respect that. I think that's a good call. And honestly, I'm mostly with you. I'm not a big hunter or fisher, but like I'm not a big explorer in cities either. Especially if we have to walk them and we are going up steep hills like in Seattle. I did not enjoy that, but there were still good things to see, and it was fun to be around it. And like it's a new place, so I at least am interested in what's happening there. But I'm not an adventurer in that sense where I'm going to do that. And I am very much with you. If I can't do this on family vacations, they won't let me. But if I am in that situation, I'm absolutely just going to go grab the food that is closest to me. I need to eat. I'm going to get my meal, and then I'm going to get back to what I actually want to be doing. So I don't blame you one bit.
I remember that Seattle trip. Like I saw how bad it was for you going down the hill, going to the ballpark. I wasn't with you when you walked back up the hill because I like obviously stayed late to do my post game work. Seeing how bad it was going down the hill for you, I can only imagine. Like, and I got a description of it, what it was like as you were going back up.
As somebody with extremely tight calves, who, by the way, had a calf cramp in his sleep last night, which I haven't had in a long time, but it is very tight today. That uphill climb where my feet were at that angle, and I want to be clear about this. This was literally a mile. That was how far we walked uphill, and not just at this was a steep hill. It was not a comfortable walk. It was awful. I did not enjoy it at all. My feet and my calves hurt the rest of the trip after that day. No. And not to say I'm in good shape, because I am not, but I think there were plenty of people who would not have enjoyed that walk because it was not fun.
Sounds to me like you got to go to the gym and just like crank up the incline on the treadmill
No, I'll cramp. I will cramp immediately.
You got to condition yourself.
Okay, I'll cramp after 1 minute. The next day, I'll cramp after 2. This is not going
Yeah,
to.
exactly. It's like a build-up. But no, we should probably get to some more listener questions here just to wrap up the show. We'll start with DH Benson, who asked, do the Brewers need another Jose Quintana?
No.
I'm going to say no. I think they have enough guys. The bigger thing with Quintana was the availability with him. And well, actually, he did miss quite a bit of time due to injury, as it turned out. But it was more so like you kind of knew what you were getting when he was on the mound. It wasn't going to be great, but it was going to be probably go out there and throw a bunch of pitches around the edges and walk quite a few guys, but not get hit because, number one, he wasn't in the zone that often, and number two, a lot of the loud contact was just being tracked down by a pretty rangy defense. I think now, fast forward a year, they have so many guys on that depth chart who I think can not only piecemeal Quintana's innings, but actually do it better than Quintana did. So I think they're going to be okay.
Yeah, I agree. I think the most interesting thing with Jose Quintana this year is going to be following. If he gets extended run with the Rockies, how high can we see an ERA go? I think that's going to be an interesting storyline to follow because, man, he might be fine away from Coors, but in Coors, it is. I just cannot envision that going well at all. So it'll be kind of interesting to follow.
Michael asks, how confident are you in the Jake Bauers breakout? So if you've been listening to the pod since it started a couple of years ago, you will know that the Jake Bauers experience is already a roller coaster. And then my personal experience on the Jake Bauers breakout train has been a roller coaster. When the Brewers first picked him up a couple of years ago, I was pretty optimistic. I was pretty high on hey, this is a guy who made some very real changes with the Yankees, who have had a reputation for actually changing some swing paths in a way that gets guys to a little more pop. And, Jake Bauers with the Yankees, there's a ton of swing and miss, but he was also hitting the ball about as hard as anybody when he put it in play. So I was pretty confident of I don't know that it's going to happen, but there are some very real ingredients here, and he needs to get some very real runway. After watching him swing and miss a lot for a season, I was like, the potential is very much still there. I just don't know if he's ever going to make enough contact where we're going to see it. Comes back on a minor league deal, continues to get more opportunities, and then comes back from injury late in the year last year, August and September, proceeds to continue to hit the ball very hard while also having by far the best contact rate of his career within a month's worth of games. Zone contact rate of 90%, I think he had during that final month. And that, I don't think that's fluky. I think that's legit. He has never done that before. So I think there were some very real developments there, which if he is making, for me, it was always just even below average contact rates, but just not terrible. I think there were going to be results there. If the contact rates can trend even closer to average now, or maybe slightly below average, when you look at the raw power that's in there, and then the plate discipline too. I don't think a lot of people realize this. He may actually have the best eye on the team. It's up there with Yelich, and Yelich is usually the guy that people point to, especially as the veteran. But Jake Bauers does not chase. I know people will see him when he gets in trouble, maybe chase that back foot breaking ball, but that's about it. He won't really go after the high fastball a whole lot anymore. He knows his strike zone. Good swing decisions, serious power in there. If the contact rates are looking okay, I'm going to say 70 to 75% chance of a Jake Bauers breakout this year.
Yeah, I think there was a lot to that finish of the season, and I mean he performed well in the Cubs series when he got his chances, but I think he even talked about it, if I'm remembering correctly, but he talked about how there was even a bit of a mental shift in how he was trying to handle the contact portion of things, which you would think that sometimes that just, they say that while it coincides with what's happening. But if he really did make a more concerted effort to do that, to get to the contact more often, and at the same time, the power didn't disappear or even really get any worse, that's a lot of things that kind of point to something that actually is working, where he made a change in his approach, but it didn't hurt him in terms of the ability to drive the ball. Yeah, I think there's a very real chance that there's a breakout. I mean, I have a lot more belief in Andrew Vaughn than I did when they acquired him going into this year. But if you told me by the end of the year, Jake Bauers was the better first baseman playing a lot, especially as the lefty facing righties a lot of the time, I would buy that. I wouldn't be surprised by that at all. And I could also see a world where it works out really well between those two and they get a lot of production from the first base spot just from both of them. And again, maybe Bauers plays some outfield like we talked about before, and even some DH on certain days could work out. But I think there's a pretty good chance he's going to force his way into lineups at some point this year because the bat is just looking like it's got too much in it for him to just be sitting on the bench backing up Vaughn.
Uncle Ron asked, curious if you could see a super utility role for Tyler Black, below average defender everywhere, but not the offensive drop off of most utility guys. I'm still kind of in the same boat that I've been in for a while. I just don't think there's a place for him on this team so long as he cannot play defense. And maybe we'll see something different in spring. Every day that I've seen him so far, he's only been with the first baseman. Maybe I missed something, but I've only seen him working out at first base. And he only played first base in the infield last year. It was first base and left field. It sounds like third base is pretty much done for. I don't think it happens. I still think they just kind of got a little stubborn with this player and missed their chance to maybe get a little value back for him when there was just never a great fit in Milwaukee.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think if anything ends up opening up, it'll be in the outfield. Just because, like I just talked about, I think between what they have in Bauers and Vaughn, first base isn't really going to end up with many opportunities. And they also have a lot of talented guys who are going to be playing first potentially in the big league level, who are probably going to be hitting AAA here soon. So his time to fill that spot kind of, I think, has come and gone. I think he probably just wasn't performing well enough to take that spot when they were willing to go out and give Andrew Vaughn a chance and do all that stuff. Like when we were in Seattle, ironically, it was the time that Black was up in the big leagues. And he actually performed well in a very small sample, much better at the big league level than he had the first time, at least. But he didn't have a very good year in AAA. It was a 105 WRC plus. I'm just not even sure he's a better hitter than most utility guys. Like, do I think if he got a full season to play in like Colorado, he could be a fine hitter at the big league level? Yeah, I do. But without a defensive spot, and that's kind of what you're banking on for the offense at this point, like I think you're right that they probably missed out. And we've talked about this before. They're willing to miss out on value because they are kind of hoping to see out the entire development and see if a guy, they'd rather get the payoff of a guy working out than worry about getting pennies on the dollar for him rather than just getting nothing for him at the end. But there was a time they could have probably capitalized on it a couple years ago when it still looked like it was going to be difficult for him to find a role, and they missed that. But it wouldn't be shocking to me if even at some point this year he's a DFA guy. I'd imagine they'd get a little lottery ticket in a trade or something for him if they do that, but he's kind of getting to that point, and I believe he'll be hitting this will be his final option year, I would imagine, right? So, he's just, I think he's out of time, unfortunately.
Andrew asks, the Brewers have compiled a lot of pitching prospects that are supposedly close to MLB ready, and some who have some MLB action, like Kyle Harrison and Chad Patrick. Of all the young pitchers they have not named Mizorowski, who has the most potential to be a top number 1 or a number 2 starter, and who has the highest floor? So, Spencer, I don't know if I'm just trying to pull up the depth chart again here to even look at how many guys they have. But so I'm looking through this list. Like, to me, I'm not sure that there is necessarily a single guy that I'm looking at and I'm thinking, yeah, that's a number 1 or even a number 2. I think more than anything, it's you have a lot of guys who have the potential to be really good number 3s. And then if I'm looking more at floor, I'm thinking kind of like Sproat, Gasser, Harrison, guys who have a little more of the fuller arsenal. I think those are the high floor guys. But even like Coleman Crow, Shane Drowan, like some of those guys who I think maybe have a little more upside than those two, than some of those guys. Like if everything goes right, like with the added swing and miss and the spin and everything in their stuff, I still think if everything goes right for those guys, you're probably still looking more at number 3 type.
Yeah, I think for me, Sprout of all of those guys probably has the ceiling of somebody who could maybe get to that 2 range. I think I talked about that when the trade happened. But I do think even most projections, if you're being generous, would probably say a 3 would be about as high as he's going to get. Now, if you look back, that's what would have been said about Woodruff, Burns, and Peralta. A lot of them were kind of all in that boat, and they made strides at the big league level. They figured some things out. They found an extra level, so you can't rule it out for any of them. But it still feels tough for me to see it for any of them. Now, if I'm including pitching prospects a couple levels away, like I do think Bishop Letson is the guy who has that type of ceiling. If he can add a little bit more velocity consistently, 7.5 feet of extension. He's already into the mid 90s as a just turned 20-year-old. He's got a 5-pitch mix. He's got the sinker. He's got the cutter. He's got a big sweeper. He's got a pretty decent changeup. And he has touched 98 in pro ball. So, like, if he's a guy who can get towards that, also while throwing quite a few strikes, like, he's the guy when I look at the system that I could see it being a legitimate, like, oh yeah, he could be a top 100 guy and then like a top 2 guy in a rotation by the time he's fully developed. But at the same time, he has been hurt a lot in the minor leagues. He has a long way to go in terms of showing that he can stay healthy over the course of a season. And he's only been in pro ball for 2 years. He made it to Double-A already, which is a really good sign of how the Brewers view him and his stuff. But he's got questions too. And then that's probably the one of all of them that, like, you can see that as a realistic outcome. There are guys who that 99th percentile outcome, you could dream of a world where it happens. But I think he's the one that if I looked and I tried to be as unbiased as I can be towards Brewers prospects, I think he's the guy that I can actually envision a future where he's a 1 or a 2. But Sprout's probably the guy closest right now that I could at least see a 2 in his future.
I would still be willing to throw Chad Patrick's name in kind of that wild card of like dude who just goes nuts all of a sudden, because I guess kind of like we talked about with Henderson, but like that slurve like changes a lot of things for me. I think that really just brings his entire arsenal together, and I think it eliminates a lot of the shortcomings in his profile. Like now you're talking really good fastball triangle where the cutter and the 4-seamer both get whiffs and the 2-seamer's okay. Then you put like what was actually a very good breaking ball after he introduced it. Like it tunnels incredibly well with that cutter. Like I wrote about it over the offseason, like Baseball Prospectus, their Arsenal tunneling metrics. I don't have the number on me, but it was like a ridiculously low. I think it was like the curveball or the slurve had like a 57% chance of being identified by the hitter as a cutter. Like it was more likely to be identified as a cutter than as a breaking ball, given the characteristics and kind of how it was coming out of his hand and things like that. So that's the one where I'm like, I'm really starting to think there's actually a lot more ceiling there than I think we probably recognized at first. But by and large, yeah, I would say I think it's a lot of guys who the better projection is probably more like very good number 3.
Yeah.
Next question, Jacob asks about the rotation mix. This is kind of something we talked about before, so I don't want to hit on it too much. But do you see any advantages or disadvantages with the distribution of arms between starters and the bullpen? It seems possible that the whole starting rotation is righties and 5 lefties are in the bullpen. I know injuries will happen and this will change, but I'm interested to see how it all shakes out. Spencer, if you have any like differing thoughts or anything you want to add, you can. But last we talked about it, basically, we're just bigger proponents of just put the best pitcher in the role that's right for him, as opposed to worrying so much about the handedness. And what also kind of helps the situation is a lot of these lefties that the Brewers are going to have in their bullpen are not strictly situational lefties. If they were, it'd be a bigger deal. But really, out of this whole group, Rob Z is really the only guy who's like, okay, he should probably really only be in the pen to pitch against lefties. Otherwise, the rest of them are either Jared Koenig, who has been very good against hitters from both sides when he's going right, or their length guys like D.L. Hall, Aaron Ashby, those kind of types who are able to get hitters from both sides out anyway, or maybe in D.L. Hall's case, like it's just kind of mediocre to both sides, so there's not really a huge gap there. So, if there were bigger issues with the platoon splits, I think it would be a problem, but I think we're still of the opinion that it doesn't matter a whole lot if the profile of those lefties.
Yeah, I think in a super ideal world, your best pitchers do form a bit less of a lefty heavy bullpen, but I don't think it's a huge deal if they are your best pitchers and they're the ones who deserve to be in the bullpen and are going to give you the best results against either hand. Like I don't think it's a huge deal. And I do think there actually could be value. I mean, not a ton, but it could change how some managers line up their lineup, given that, okay, it's a righty starter, but we know that almost certainly we're seeing a lefty after him. It could change how certain things are lined up from that perspective, that like, okay, we can line our whole lineup up with lefties to face this righty starter, but then they're going to see lefties out of the bullpen. So we might have to go through a bunch of subs or guys who can't handle these lefties when it gets there. So maybe it changes things a little bit from that perspective. I doubt a ton, but I think from that, if you're going to look at it from like the spin it in a positive way, I could see that being something that could actually affect how teams kind of view building a lineup.
Final question, a less optimistic question, given that we're at the start of baseball season, but this is going to be kind of a cloud hanging over everybody's head this year. Nick asks, what are our options as fans in 2027 if there is no season? Rewatch an old season, follow semi-pro ball, get into the NPB. I really wish there was a robust archive of Brewers radio broadcasts from around 2008, but it seems like most of that is lost or isn't public. I don't know. I would say maybe watch independent ball. That's what I did a little bit during like the COVID shortened season in 2020. Otherwise, I like Major League Baseball. Like I know there are certain people who are like, oh, they're more passionate like college ball or indie ball or whatever. Guys who like to watch the minor leagues a lot, like Spencer. I like Major League Baseball, though. It is the highest level of baseball. And every time I watch any kind of other baseball, I immediately can tell just from like the quality of the game and the athletes and the way it's all going down. Like you can tell immediately it's not the same. So nothing is going to replicate that. And I think that if you're trying to pretend it will, it's just not. And a lot of times if you do like that more than MLB, it's probably because there are like different traits about that level of baseball that endear you more to it than like the high competition level of MLB. It's just different. Like you are not getting higher quality play than what you get in MLB. So like it's not going to be the same game if you're watching any other level. I would say like indie ball is probably kind of close. If you want to watch overseas leagues, that's trickier because of the time difference and everything and the availability of all that stuff. I think a lot of indie ball teams do stream most of their games now. So you can watch them that way. And a lot of times those teams will have guys who at least played in like maybe the upper minors or something. So guys who are a little bit higher up, and like opposition probably isn't too different from the foreign leagues because those are generally considered closer to the minors and to the majors. But honestly, I would say like if there is no baseball, it's a good opportunity to find something else that brings you joy that is not baseball. And to me, that felt unfathomable a few years ago. But as someone who now works in baseball and covers a baseball team and is around baseball all the time, I think I've gotten into more of a spot of like being okay with stepping away from baseball and being okay with like enjoying something else instead. I remember like before I started even like working on a beat, like you'd hear from people who were like tired of baseball and just wanted to put it away for a little bit, wanted to be done. You'll hear that like from coaches and stuff too. Like guys who coach for the Brewers will be like, they will look forward to their off days, and on their off days, they do not want to think about baseball for 1 second because, no matter how much you love something, if it does consume that much time, it's just generally healthier to have something else that you enjoy too that is not related to baseball. And I'm not saying that that's, that the person who's asking the question doesn't have that, but I guess that's just kind of my encouragement if we do end up in an unfortunate situation where there is no baseball. Like, I think I've said it to you before, Spencer, in a perfect world for me, the off season would only be 2 months because even though I do have those other things, I still get the itch back after like 6 weeks. But sometimes it's good to just be able to put baseball down because like fandom can also be very stressful for people, especially the diehards who are like emotionally attached to the success or failure of the team they follow. And I get it. Like when I was a kid, that's where I was too. So I would just encourage people though that maybe this will just, if things go poorly here in negotiations and with the way that all this stuff is kind of brewing, it's going to suck. It's going to suck a lot. It's going to suck for the game. It's going to suck for the fans. It's going to suck for the people who this is a big part of their livelihood, but maybe an opportunity to take a bigger picture look and be like, okay, like there is more to life than baseball, believe it or not, even though I still sometimes have a hard time reminding myself of that, but there is. So that's my spiel.
Yeah. You'll catch me recruiting a lot more during the summer. You'll catch me researching future drafts. You are absolutely correct that it is healthier. And you are absolutely correct that in many cases it would be better for people to escape from it. I have yet to find that escape from it. I have I've got other sports, but I don't think that's necessarily what you're referring to. I'll pay attention to basketball. I do, like during COVID, I was up at like 1 a.m. watching KBO baseball because that was what we could get when they were showing it on ESPN. They had I remember Eric Thames getting interviewed while they were doing that, and they were broadcasting some of those games. But no, I mean, there is still a stretch, even, once the Brewers season wraps up and we're done with our fall ball stuff kind of at a similar time, where even I am like, okay, I need a month here where like I'm not doing much baseball stuff. And by much, I mean like right now it consumes so much of my day. In that time, like I'm not going back and at least for a month, I'm not going back and watching random minor league starts, but like a week ago, I was watching a Jack Hostetler start because I was like, I need to see what he looked like when he got his opportunity. So, like, Jack's correct. You should absolutely listen to him. For me, that message was probably pointed at me more than any listener. But it would be recommended to find something else to find some enjoyment in, find some time to put aside instead of putting it aside to watch 2.5 hours to 3 hours of baseball every night. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to do that, but I'm going to try because I think I'm going to have to try, unfortunately. I don't think I'm going to really – it's very much trending towards me having to figure something out during this whole stretch of at least part of the 2027 season, I would imagine. So I did it during the COVID year, although I was mostly locked inside my house for that. So I guess I didn't really have many options. Maybe this will be a little better. I have more options to figure something out. So we'll see where it trends. But yeah, that was me sounding pathetic to answer that question, I guess. So that's where we can wrap this up. But no, I do think that's a good general way to view it, is like baseball's going to be there at some point again. It's going to come back. Hey, go support your local D3 teams, especially if you're in the Milwaukee Wauwatosa area. For a couple months of the MLB season, you could at least do that. There's always baseball somewhere. If you genuinely do need to get your fix of baseball, you'll be able to find it. Like Jack said, indie ball, college will be going on. And then there's just always something going. I mean, there'll be summer ball teams. I played for the Dousman Frogs, and you wouldn't believe how many people would show up at those games from that area just to watch baseball. So like you can find baseball somewhere. It'll be happening if you truly need that fix. But in general, it'll be a good opportunity to try and find something else that can bring you some happiness that maybe it will be less stressful, like Jack said, because baseball definitely can be stressful at the same time as it is bringing you happiness at the good times. So, yeah, no, it's I'm going to start prepping myself now, Jack. I'm going to start researching other things that I might enjoy. In reality, I'm just going to start like scouting the NBA draft or something, but it'll be something else.
Well, you said it gets stressful. It's not stressful yet, though. Right now, it's hope spring's new, optimism.
Oh, yes.
Spring training. We're back in full swing here on the Brewers Beat and on the Brewer Fanatic podcast. So that means we're back on it every single week release schedule. A lot of developments to follow here that we kind of ran through in camp over the next several weeks, but we're just laying the groundwork right now in a 2-hour episode.
That means we're back. That is how we know we're back.
We are back. No more of these 45-minute, hour-long, watered-down garbage episodes. We are back with the real deal every week. So 2 more hours coming up next Friday. Thank you for listening.